Hey there guys, I am Turkey, and if you exist in the Dead by Daylight fandom right now, I'm sure you've probably heard the rumors and the leaks that the next survivor in Dead by Daylight is going to be HADDIE KAUR. And since not many people are giant DBD lore nerds like I am, I'm going to sift through the dozens of pages of archive lore that we've been given about HADDIE and summarize it for you here, so you can truly appreciate a character that DBD has been telling the story of for a long time now, and you can be up to speed for her potential release. And if she isn't the new survivor, she's still pretty fucking cool, so either way, I hope you enjoy. HADDIE is honestly hard to summarize in any brief way. Keep in mind, the archives are written to be intentionally vague and up to interpretation in a lot of cases, so it's completely possible that I've misunderstood or misread some of her lore, and if I do, I'll make corrections in the comments below. We see a lot of snippets of HADDIE's life, as well as her life in another dimension, as well as her life in the future, and also it could not be our HADDIE, and it could be a HADDIE from a different timeline, so it's hard to pinpoint who our HADDIE is, and what pieces of lore that we read are meant to be taken as fiction or reality. Let me explain this in a way that is easy to understand. So basically, the entity is a living dimension. There are several pockets inside of the entity that are their own dimensions, and potentially several versions and timelines of the same character can exist in these pockets, or all of them, or none of them. It's very complicated. A good example I can give is this cutscene from one of the Observer's archives in a previous tome, where we see Evan McMillan, aka the Trapper, fighting a giant spider, presumably at the McMillan estate. And then it pans out to reveal that it's actually the story from a comic book that the Observer had been reading. What does this mean? Well, behavior loves to play with the idea that anything that can happen has and will happen, which means that somewhere out there in the Omniverse, every single possible combination of factors, real or fiction, exist in the real world in its own dimension. This comic book is a memory in the entity's realm, but for the world that this happens in, the cutscene of Evan that we saw, for him and all of the people in that dimension, what we perceive as a scary story in a comic book is their reality. They live and breathe and think and feel. They are real. Here's an excerpt from Arcus 4. Interestingly enough, I found 17 versions of a story featuring a killer named Evan written by 17 versions of the same author from the Omniverse. 17 similar stories with sometimes subtle, sometimes significant differences. What I find particularly interesting is how the stories are written as fiction in one world and non-fiction in another. It reminds me of Universus Alveo, a theory that suggests that the human mind might very well be equipped with a powerful networking mechanism that reaches out to other worlds for wisdom and knowledge from our other selves. Some can use their minds in this way and others can't. The theory suggests that those who have experienced trauma in their formative years detach from their reality, allowing them to explore other realities and worlds with relative ease. Artists like magicians and shamans see small things in the big, unexplained, endless dream that is the Omniverse, and they bring those ideas or insights back to entertain, enlighten, and inspire the world. Fiction in one world, non-fiction in another. Everything is real or nothing is. It's also how behavior explains fictional licenses like Michael Myers appearing in the realm, because for Michael and Laurie, they aren't a movie in a popular horror classic, that was just their life. It's explained in some archive entries that in the Omniverse, some artistic and creative people can tap into other realities with their third eye using their pineal gland, which is a reoccurring tool mentioned throughout the lore and very important to the mystics, aka the Black Veil, aka the Entity Cult. I'll get into the Entity Cult later. But essentially it says that these writers and artists don't make stories up. They can see throughout dimensions and realities to these worlds where these stories are real, and they transcribe them into art for people in their dimension to enjoy without even knowing it. It's a super fascinating element in DBD lore, and the idea that overcoming dimensions and learning how to thin the barrier between them is also a reoccurring plot in the DBD story. What does this mean for HADDIE's lore? Well, I'll explain. Let's take a look at Arcus 13, the series featuring HADDIE and Jordan on Terra 717, or Haley and Jaden on Terra 1315, or even Hannah and Justin on Terra 238, are all titled Harbinger FM instead of the Harbinger of Hell, and they seem to have more insight on what the entity might be and how it corrupts and influences other worlds. Other Terra worlds have quite unique and sometimes contradictory versions of the Harbinger series, which make them difficult to track and interpret. But despite the discrepancies, each version seems to feature siblings trying to expose a nefarious cult devoted to the entity. I am currently searching the Rift for the real memories that inspired all the adventures to see how close they are to the actual inspiration. I'm even wondering if HADDIE and Jordan are here, trapped in the entity, and if they are, I'm hoping their memories will somehow help me find a way out of here. The Observer here implies that there are real versions of HADDIE and Jordan, Jordan, aka the main inspirations. However, in Arcus 27, he comes to the conclusion that there are probably several real Haddie and Jordans that exist in the realm, and that some of the entries in the archives we've read about Haddie and Jordan might be fiction, but might also be real. Most of the fiction featuring Haddie and Jordan end with one of the siblings disappearing, which accounts for some of the contradicting memories I've discovered in the fog. I believe there are several actual Haddies and Jordans stuck here with all the others. The memories I've studied so far conflict with one another so that they rarely line up with each other or the fictional stories I found in the Chamber of Blood. However, I must always remember that the connected stories and artwork in the chamber are interpretive, they are not exact, and they were more or less inspired by several versions of the siblings that exist or will exist or have existed within the endless tapestry that is the Omniverse. While they are fiction, they are worth noting because inside these stories still holds truth to the entity, the Black Fog, and the Mystics. These fictional stories are inspired by real Haddie and Jordans that exist in the Omniverse, hence why I explained to you how fiction works in the entity's realm. While these stories never actually happened for us, for these characters and recounts, they do, so they cannot be disregarded. The Harbinger series from Terra 719 is also worth noting because the details included by the author seemed closest to what we studied back home concerning ancients and living dimensions, not to mention what I've been able to discover by examining the memories of souls marooned here. Piece by piece, or rather, story by story, I'm getting closer to salvation, or insanity, whichever comes first. Now that I've explained the things that you should keep in mind while hearing her stories, let's get into who HADDIE KAUR really is. HADDIE KAUR is an Indian woman from Canada whose parents disappeared while they were vacationing when she was 5 years old. She still remembers the whispers, the approaching darkness, and the sense that they were somehow in another reality. This is very similar to the stories of Felix and Elodie. India is a very important location in the DBD story because it's where the Mystics operate most of their business. The most in-depth we ever see from the inner workings of the Mystics is from Talbot Grimes' lore, also known as the Blight or the Alchemist. He was recruited by the Mystics while he was visiting a city in India and was taken back to their secret ancient school posing as a monastery, where he spent an unknown amount of time researching their ancient knowledge, primarily a chemical produced in the pineal gland called the soul chemical, which they believed could be used to unlock doors between realities. In Felix and Elodie's lore, they were visiting the exact island where Talbot used to conduct his experiments, and they even found his underground lab and some of his old research, which implies that the Mystics were even involved in the British East India Company where Talbot initially worked before being recruited into the Mystics, which is completely believable considering the fact that the Mystics have their hand in literally everything. They are an ancient, powerful cult with ties to every major power in the world. Think the Illuminati, but if they had an ancient, all-power deity on a leash and at their disposal. Dire Island is a very important place to the Mystics, and it seems to be where they conduct their meetings and potentially even their sacrificial rituals to the entity. Felix and Elodie's parents also disappeared while they were visiting Dire Island, and given the fact that Haddie is Indian and was also on vacation, it's completely possible that her parents were also involved in the Mystics, just like Felix and Elodie's parents, and she might have even been visiting Dire Island when they did. This isn't confirmed, keep in mind, this is just me speculating, but an interesting similarity nonetheless. It's also never explicitly stated that Haddie was born in India, only that her father was raised there, and given the fact that she does live in Canada and her godparents were French-Canadian too, that leaves a whole window of opportunity to where she and her family really started in life. It's possible that they tried to flee the Mystics when their daughter was born, or tried to stay in the cult but moving away caused complications, or moved to Canada before Haddie was even born, or they were never involved in the cult at all. We just don't know. All we know for sure is that Haddie has lived in Canada for almost her entire life, and that her parents disappeared and it involved the entity in some way. Today, Haddie runs a successful podcast with her brother Jordan and her uncle Stefan called The Harbinger of Hell. What sets Haddie apart from her brother Jordan is her special abilities. Ever since she can remember, most notably since she was 12, she's been able to see things beyond the veil. She can travel to places where the veil between the entity's realm and our world is thin, that she calls the overlap, and she can see and experience memories from the past as if it was happening now. She can also directly interact with the realm, and dark things and memories seem drawn to her. The kids from her childhood used to tease her for her knack for attracting bad luck and tragedy by calling her Helly Haddie and the Harbinger of Hell, which she named her podcast after. It is funded completely by an anonymous benefactor who sends them to overlap so they can center episodes of their podcast around the locations. What do we know about the overlap? Not much, honestly, but the survivor statement from someone named Sean Dent is an extremely interesting read. When I say survivor, I don't mean trials either. It's meant to mean that he survived a tragedy in the real world. In this entry, a man named Sean used to listen to podcasts of creepy stories with his friends, and they discovered that these podcasts held secret coded messages planted by the Mystics as a way to communicate with each other and send coordinates of overlaps to each other. They didn't actually believe any of it was real, but when one of the locations turned out to be near them, they went went to check out the place for fun. When they got there, they found a crumbling asylum covered in overgrown ruins surrounded by the black fog. When they were there, they were attacked by the Oni, who killed every single one of his friends except for Sean, because when he crawled past the black fog, the Oni couldn't follow him. It was like an invisible barrier and he couldn't leave, but Sean could. And a man named Hans, who identified as a detective, asked him what had happened, but when he heard police sirens approaching, he disappeared. The police wanted to know how to crack the codes being sent via the podcast, but Sean didn't know how to do it. That was his friend Tina, who the Oni had killed. There's also another account of people from the real world interacting with these overlaps. In Haddie's first archive story, titled Evil Eyes, which is an entry from a pile of partially burned books in a room the observer calls the Chamber of Blood. In Evil Eyes, we meet HADDIE KAUR, an older teenage woman who was sipping tea while her uncle and brother were trying to locate the site of a massacre. When they do, Haddie and Jordan set off to the site near an old signaling fort where sometime in the 1800s a group of British soldiers died while fighting a group of thuggies, which was a term used to describe a group of organized and professional robbers and murderers. British soldiers would occasionally capture and prosecute these thugs, which explains why the official story is what it is. But their guide explains that according to local rumors, the soldiers had actually turned their guns against one another and that something in the caves of the fort had driven them mad. Haddie turned to the remains of the fort and could see the memory of British soldiers cutting down thuggy rebels. One of the thugs was holding a powerful artifact, which was a broken piece of pillar. He was running through the caves while desperately trying to escape the soldiers. Haddie and Jordan start heading into the caves while the guide leaves them there to go home. Just before they could enter, they were captured by 3 men holding guns who spoke an ancient unknown language. It's never stated who these people are. They could be thuggies, they could be the mystics, we just don't know. These captors, however, knew about the overlap, they knew about Haddie's abilities, and they forced her at gunpoint to lead them to where the artifact, the broken pillar, had been hidden. Haddie followed the trail of memories and could sense that they were entering an overlap, where her power grew and became heightened in inexplicable ways. Also, a little side note, I think it's important to note that the color of the memories that Haddie sees are always described as orange, which is particularly interesting to me due to what we know about the Blight event. When the entity is infested with a sickness called the Blight, the moon in its sky turns orange and it secretes a nectar called pustula nectar, which contains the pure power of the entity, which is also orange. I don't know if this means anything yet, or if Haddie is somehow connected to the entity and its power in some way due to the color similarities, but I do think it's an interesting detail that we should keep in mind. Haddie sees the soldiers blink in and out of existence, and when they come back they are attacked by an indescribable creature with hundreds of red eyes. It ripped the soldiers to pieces and grabbed the thug, dragging him off into its feeding den, making him drop the artifact along the way. When the memories faded away, Haddie and Jordan and their captors found themselves in a cave filled with human bones covered in a thick rotting sludge. The captors demanded to know where the pillar was, and Haddie pointed towards the feeding den, saying that it could be in there, knowing it wasn't. The leader went to check the mouth of the feeding den while the other 2 captors searched the bones with Haddie and Jordan. While the 2 were distracted with the flies covering their faces, Haddie found the pillar and slid it to Jordan secretly. The leader of the captors was suddenly attacked by the creature Haddie had seen. The other 2 captors fired blindly into the darkness while Haddie grabbed the leader's dropped flashlight and ran away with Jordan back where they came. She could see the entrance to the cave but knew that they wouldn't make it. She turned to face the creature and grabbed a revolver off a dead body nearby, but when she tried to fire it, it had no ammo. The creature attacked and missed, but Haddie grabbed a kukri the body had also had on it, which if you don't know is basically a long curved knife, and slashed it at the creature. She cut its hand off, but when she went for the killing blow, it lunged away and she missed, the knife falling out of her hand. She grabbed a slab of stone just as the creature attacked and slammed it into its head, hitting it until it was nothing but a pulp. Just as she killed it, she heard the sounds of more creatures approaching from the caves. She turned and ran out of the cave just before the creatures reached her, and they too slammed against an invisible barrier that signaled where the overlap ended, where they could not cross. Haddie grabbed onto the pillar and tuned into it, and in her mind's eye, she saw mystics hiding pieces of the same pillar in another world. I also just want to note the significance of the pillars in the Mystics story, and if you've seen the Blight's Archive cutscene, each member of the Mystics are represented as pillars in the scene where he's being turned into the Blight by the entity. We don't know yet the significance of the pillars or why they're powerful. Right after almost dying horribly, Haddie and Jordan bring out their phone and start filming the intro to the next episode of their podcast, which is about the urban legends surrounding the creatures that dwell in the caves, with eyes that burn right through the soul, titled The Evil Eyes of the Himalayas. A lot of Haddie and Jordan's stories are like this. Haddie has an unshakable will and drive to uncover the truth of these mysterious ruins, and Jordan is the supportive comic relief who supports Haddie as she does her thing. These overlaps hold some kind of significance to the Mystics, and as long as they are researching and uncovering the secrets of these weak spots, they are also discovering the secrets of the Mystics and their entire organization. And in Arcus 13, the Observer describes them as trying to expose the Mystics, so eventually they turn their attention away from the show and instead focus on the Mystics. The Observer also says that some of the stories claim that broken and traumatized people can derive strange abilities abilities from the vibrations emitting from the overlaps, and access knowledge beyond the veil as if it was right there. That's pretty much all we know about overlaps so far, so until we get more lore or Hattie's backstory explains them more in depth, that's about it for now. In Chamber of Blood, Harbinger FM, worlds away, Haddie discovers who their secret benefactor is. He was a sound engineer for a highly classified military project in the Office of Strategic Operations, or the OSO, named Surin Rivera. He underwent what he described as unorthodox training so he can enter the overlap and interact with the realm, which was near impossible to do with adults with developed minds. And it's implied that the OSO experimented on and broke children so their developing minds could be tuned to withstand the stress of the overlap. It doesn't say if Haddie was one of these children, and she says in her podcast that she was born with these abilities, so she probably isn't. The OSO was probably trying to artificially create these naturally occurring abilities some people are just born with. Surin and his colleagues, who were also trained to enter the overlap, went to these weak spots all over the world, and many of them never returned, or if they did, they came back lost, confused, and even insane. Surin's goal in funding their podcast is not only to locate his lost colleagues, but also understand the overlap. "You don't understand," Surin continued. "This isn't just about the friends I lost. There are things in the overlap we need to understand. There could be a new type of energy, a new way of seeing the world, the universe," Jordan interrupted with a laugh. "Or, there's nothing there, and it's just a living hell." Surin sends Haddie and Jordan all over the world so that they can make episodes of their podcast at particular overlaps. He's using Haddie's abilities to tune into these weak spots to learn more about the overlap and look for his lost friends, and in return he pays for their entire show and covers all of their expenses. Haddie tells Jordan that she wants to look into him and find out why he's been helping them in funding their show. But before they get very far, Surin shows up at the deli that they're in New York, and demands that they leave his case alone, and that they aren't ready for what they're prying into. Haddie demands to know why he's helping them, but he refuses to answer, saying she's exposing herself to dangerous people that don't answer to the police or the military. She won't take no for an answer, and he again insists that she leaves his case alone, and he leaves. Haddie instantly knows that she won't be leaving his case alone. They travel to an address nearby that belonged to Colonel Jim Dunn, a man who worked with Surin in the OSO. But when they got there, his wife answered the door and explained that he'd been missing for 7 years. She agrees to tell Haddie and Jordan everything that she knows, which isn't much, just what her husband had previously shared with her before he disappeared. Mrs. Dunn tells them that Jim worked for the OSO, the stuff of conspiracy theories. Jim had told her that there were places that defied the laws of physics, that defied human comprehension, places that connected worlds away to other dimensions, and the government called it the overlap. Haddie remembers this term from when she and Jordan were investigating the mystics, described as a mysterious cult that believed in an ancient deity that would one day help humanity to evolve to a higher plane of existence. She found it strange that the mystics and the government had the same name for the phenomenon. Mrs. Dunn also goes on to say that Jim had described the overlaps as seeming to consume our world, getting bigger and bigger as they went down some kind of celestial digestive track, and that they'd even managed to pull things out from the overlaps. She said as time went on, Jim got angry and told her less, which was very out of character for him, and she heard rumors that the government was doing things to him so that he could stay in the overlap for longer periods of time. She insists that he didn't leave her and that something happened to him despite what the government told her, and that the police dismiss her as a conspiracy theorist. Before she can finish, she's suddenly shot and killed right in front of Haddie and Jordan. They dropped to the ground as they were showered in bullets from all around the house and quickly made their way into the basement trying to get away. An assassin followed them down the stairs and pointed his rifle at them, but before he could pull the trigger, Surin appeared behind him and shot him first. He told them to follow him before the others come, and they quickly followed him out of the house past 7 dead bodies and got in Surin's car. They peeled away from the scene. Haddie begins asking him about everything, if the rumors and the overlap were true and if worlds really intersect. Keep in mind, this is probably a different universe than the one that we read about in Evil Eyes, so this Haddie doesn't understand the overlap as well as the Haddie from the other world. He insists that they investigate an abandoned subway nearby for their podcast and stick to the agenda. Haddie asks if it's an overlap, and he confirms that it is. He finally explains to them his goal in finding his colleagues and understanding the overlap, and Haddie and Jordan are disgusted to find out that he had a hand in experimenting on children. Haddie understands that she's being used as a tool, but now she's invested in what's really going on with the overlap, and the journals she's collected that tell tales of people trapped in a deathless world and how artists could reach into other worlds they believed to be their imagination, but was really their third eye. This is all we see of Haddie while she is still young. The next entry we read from her is about 40 years in the future, titled Chamber of Blood, 12 to Midnight. Haddie enters a half-burned building that caught fire a week prior and goes up the stairs to the roof to find a man named Max Holt, an ex-soldier whose unit was attacked by something otherworldly, and he survived because of his abilities. Max is just like Haddie, with the same ability to tune into other worlds and see and hear memories nobody else can. Nobody believed Max when he had described what had happened, and he was discharged from the military and given an endless supply of opioids to fog his memory and neutralize his questions. Max genuinely believed that he was crazy, but Haddie tells him that she believes him. He asks her what she wants, and she tells him that she wants to recruit him to join her team in order to save the world. He asks what she knows about his unit, and she says not much, but she knows that there are some very powerful people who think they have the answers to what he's looking for. She's been caught in the crossfire between two warring groups that both need people like her and Max to access the other realm and bring things back. She's been running from them for 40 years, and she's helped other people like her and him from suffering to an unknown fate at their cruel hands. Haddie says she lost her brother to the fog too, but she can still see and hear him, but she seems unsure when she says it. He asks where Jordan is, and she says she doesn't know, but she knows she can see him again. Haddie suddenly pulls a gun and shoots two people as they emerge from the exit door. She tells them that people are looking for him and want him dead, and that she's here to save him. He follows her back to the basement of a bookstore where she set up shop. In this basement, she's covered the walls in hundreds of pictures and stories connected by red strings of people that went missing all over the world. Between the pictures are transcripts of horror stories from various podcasts that have been decoded into numbers and coordinates. She also had stored artifacts and artworks from ancient civilizations that were unrecognizable to Max. He noticed a picture of his unit in Afghanistan on the wall and asks Haddie if this was the list of people that someone wanted dead. Haddie says it's a list of the people that they failed, with a picture of her brother nearby too. She says that the list of people with special abilities being targeted by powerful elites will either be killed in a ritual sacrifice or will be used as tools to search through overlaps that lead to other dimensions. Haddie discovered the list by decoding the podcasts that they use to send each other messages. She tells him that she needs him and that they are 12 seconds to midnight and nobody knows it, and that he has no idea how powerful the two warring groups are. Max stepped closer to the picture of his unit while Haddie retrieved a folder containing a picture of an abandoned cemetery in Chile, along with a picture of a man. She holds the pictures to Max, who stares at them for a thoughtful moment before finally agreeing to join her team. Yes, you heard that correctly! An abandoned cemetery in Chile with a picture of a man. Sound familiar? It's the cemetery from the codes that Jonah deciphered in his backstory, which from there we know that Jonah himself holds a lot of significance to the location and the codes themselves. Someone mailed Jonah those coordinates to the cemetery on his 16th birthday, so somebody led him there. Why? We don't know. All we know is that he's important to either the Mystics or the second unnamed group they are at war with, and Haddie is somehow connected to the location in some way too. And this is pretty much all that we know about Haddie as of recording this video. As for what we just read, let's think about it. So I think it's pretty safe to say that we have no idea which of these stories is from the real Haddie, the one that is potentially showing up in the realm, and we won't know until behavior tells us. There was also another story featuring Haddie and Jordan and a vampire-like creature possessed by the black fog that I didn't summarize for you because it's not relevant to her overarching story, and it's being used mainly as research by the observer to understand the black fog, more so than it is to understand Haddie. But I'll put the screenshots on screen here if you want to pause and read it. It's still an interesting read and talks about ancient symbols used as seals to contain the black fog, but it's ultimately irrelevant. The observer goes into depth in several archive entries about how there are an endless amount of versions of Haddie that exist across the multiverse and even in the realm. So let's take what we've read from them all and combine the similarities and create a complete summary of who Haddie KAUR really is. Haddie is a woman born with a unique ability to tune into the entity's realm, particularly at overlaps where the veil between worlds is thin, and can see memories and creatures from different worlds as if they were happening right in front of her, and sometimes they actually are. She runs a podcast called The Harbinger of Hell with her adopted brother Jordan and her uncle Stefan, who mostly handles the production and doesn't have the stomach for adventure like Haddie and Jordan do. Haddie is a headstrong and determined person who is unshaken by threats and danger, and trouble and tragedy seem to follow her wherever she goes. There are two powerful groups that are at war with each other, and they both need people with Haddie's abilities in order to access the overlap and retrieve things from the worlds for unknown reasons. Haddie has dedicated her life to exposing not only the Mystics, but also the other powerful organization that would see her dead or used as a tool. In almost every iteration of her story, Jordan is taken by the fog, and is most likely in the entity's realm, or another world entirely. Haddie is determined not only to save people like herself from a fate of suffering at the hands of two warring organizations, but also to see her brother Jordan again one day. Or, if 12 to Midnight is a fictional story, then she's just a teenage girl who runs a podcast with her brother, who is going to uncover the secrets of the entity cult, which is equally as exciting. That's pretty much it. Once we find out more information, I might add to this video or even make a part 2. You never know. If you guys have more questions, feel free to ask them in the comments, or let me know if you'd like to see more videos like this. I am head over heels in love with Dead by Daylight lore. I have been for years, and I could talk about this shit all day. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you guys enjoyed, please leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.